Hi, today I'm going to show you how to calculate vendor mix. It's like sales mix, like we talked about in class. We're just going to roll it up a different way. So here's our data set. Here's a description. Vanessa's Baked Goods is a family-owned bakery, serve its local community, and we've got some data from them. But this data is not customer data like with the Grind Coffee. It is vendor data. We've captured the amount that we pay for products, baked goods products from different vendors. Let's first talk about where we want to go. The question we want to address is how do the vendor mixes of the top three largest suppliers change over time? So vendor mix is much like sales mix, except the pie piece of the pie portion is going to be based on vendor, not product. Um, and so here's what we're planning to do. We want to do the necessary information modeling. That means joins, transformations, calculated column calculations necessary to be able to produce this chart. Now notice a few things about this chart. Along the bottom, we have time. That's month and year. Along the y-axis, I didn't label it, but that is vendor mix. And then we have just displayed the top three largest vendors and watched their vendor mix change across time for every month from 2022 to 2024. So let's go ahead and take a look at our data. I'm going to pull that up. This is the data we're going to be importing. Notice the file that you have. There's data dictionaries for the vendors table, the products table, the purchase orders table. So again, purchase orders, we're in the expenditure cycle, not the revenue cycle, like with LaGrind Coffee, where we're actually selling to customers. And then line items. So here's our vendors table. Notice we have 25 different vendors. And from those vendors, we have, let's go down, roughly like 56 different products. You can see right here, 56. So we have 56 different products, and each product we source from one vendor. So chocolate drizzle eclair, we only source from vendor 10. Vendor 10 is Rustic Rye Bakers. I tried my best to get the names to match with the vendors. I don't know why Rustic Rye Bakers produces chocolate drizzle eclairs, but they do. Um, and then we have purchase orders. And notice that we have purchase order ID, purchase order date, ship date. Because we want to break it down into month and year, we're going to be using this purchase order date so we can break it down into year. And every purchase order is connected with line items. So for purchase order 1000, we have 6 different items on that purchase order, and we show the quantity of each of those products and then the item price that we sold that product at. So in order to get the line item revenue or the line item cost, we're going to have to multiply quantity ordered times item price. In this case, item price represents the price that we paid the vendor to ship us 1 unit of that item. All right, so let's get started. Let's think about what we have to do. If we're going to answer the question, if we want to have our chart, we have to have vendor mix, and we're going to base vendor mix on cost, total cost. So we got to have quantity ordered and item price to get total cost. We're going to want to display, let's look back here, the actual vendor name. So the vendor name we're going to get from the vendors table. So far that means we have to have line items and vendor name from the vendors table. So vendors and line items we need. Now we want the purchase orders table because we're going to split out year and month from the purchase order date. That's the only place we have a date. And then we need to know if we're going to actually take our purchase order and we're going to take all the products across that purchase order and roll them up into vendors. We need all the products they purchase on that purchase order. So in short, you're going to have to think about this. We're going to need the line items table, the purchase orders table, the products table, because the products table links us back to the vendor ID. That's why we have to have the products table. It's that bridge between the purchase orders, and then we come to the purchase order, look it up and say it belongs to vendor 10, and we go look up the vendor name. So let's get started. I'm going to close our data file because we're going to use Power Query to import all our data. So this is the steps that we go through. We're going to go data, get data from file, from Excel workbook. I'm going to go say this is where I've stored my workbook, copy that, paste it there, and we are going to go take, this is our data set that we were just looking at. We'll import just the worksheets, not the data dictionaries. So select multiple. We want line items, products, purchase orders, and vendors. Then we're going to transform the data. And the first thing we want to do is get all our data together. So we're going to, we'll make this bigger. We're going to join all our data. And just like with LaGrind Coffee, we're going to start with line items. If you don't know why, then you need to go back and study. And I'm going to do a merge queries as new. And I'll first join in products. So I can join products to line items on product ID. It says I've got a perfect set of matches here. Click OK. Then I'm going to expand this. I'm not going to have it insert the product or the table name in front of the column name. And I'm going to remove product ID because I have it right here. All right, now let's go do the other. We're going to go merge again. This time I'm not going to merge as new. I'm just going to merge in purchase orders into that table, and we'll merge it on purchase order ID. Click OK. Expand. Remove purchase order ID because we already have it in here over here on the left. Then I'm going to go merge in one more time our vendors. So all I'm doing with these steps is getting all the data together using a series of left joins. I'm going to merge vendor ID on vendor ID. Remember, vendor ID came from the purchase orders from the products table. So I'm just doing a series of left joins to get all my data together. So let's see here. I don't want vendor ID. I already have it over here, right there. So now I've got all my data together, and I'm going to label it all data. And then the next step I want to do is I actually want to engineer some columns. I need to actually calculate the line item cost for each of these rows. Now represents a line item because I did a left join into my line items table. I'm going to duplicate this so I don't lose it. And then I'm going to undo that. I'm going to go ahead and delete that. I'm going to do my calculated columns in here. So remember, I'm doing vendor mix. So I need vendor, and then I need month and year. So I'm going to extract out month and year, but the size of my pie is going to be based on line item cost. So first I'm going to calculate line item cost. I'm going to go add column, custom column. I'll call it LI for line item cost. And my line item cost is simply going to be quantity ordered times item price, which is the price that we paid the vendor for this item. Click OK. It sticks it over here. Now let's go extract out the year and the month from purchase order date. So I'm going to go add new column, date, year. Then I'm going to do it again, purchase order date, add new column, date, and I'm going to extract out the month. So now I have these three columns, line item cost, year, and month, and those are what's I'm going to use to do my group by so that I can group them into pies, whole pies based on line item costs. But first, I would be interested in knowing what are my top 3 vendors. Let's go find those out. Now that I've got line item costs, I'm just going to roll up all the costs that I've spent with each vendor and then find the top 3. And that's going to be easier to do in Excel, so I'm going to close and load my data. Let it load in here. You see it's loading all those tables. And now let's go to all data. Once that generates, I'm going to create a pivot table on all data. So I'm going to go insert, pivot table, let it put it on a new worksheet. And then I'm just going to drag vendor name because I want to find the vendors that have the most costs, the most that I've expended money to. I'm going to take line item costs and put it in there. Now it's summing up all my line item costs. And I am going to go do value filters, and I'm going to apply a top end value filter, and I'm going to take the top 3, and it's going to be based on line item costs. And there I have my 3 vendors. So let's zoom in. You can see that. I'm going to copy these vendors and go stick them in my instructions just so I know which ones to filter for. So now I know the top 3 vendors, and I'm going to use that when I get to my chart, and I'm going to filter them based on vendor name. Okay, so now the next step is I'm going to go back to my all data. I'm going to jump back into Power Query. I'm going to go to data, get data, and launch Power Query. Now notice when I do this, I'm not importing any new data into Power Query. I didn't really change any data in Excel. So I just want to pick up where I left off. I am going to duplicate this all data just so that I have kind of an audit trail. And that I'm going to name it based on what my next step is. So I'm going to say line item cost by vendor, year, and month. And so that's going to hint to me that I want to do a group by. So I'm going to go ahead and do a group by. And my whole pie is going to be based on my vendor name. I'm going to have to add a new grouping. So I go to advance, my year, and add another one so I can get my month. And what do I want to roll up? I want to roll up my line item costs. Okay, so I'm going to call this, this is going to be my total cost. I'll call that total cost. That's my column name. I'm going to sum, and the column I'm going to sum across is LI costs, or line item costs. Now you can do the math here to know how many rows, approximately how many rows I should have. You're going to take the number of vendors, which is 25, times the number of years. And if you take a look at this, it's harder to see here, but we go from 2022 to 2024, and you're not going to load them all in. It's easier to see back in Excel. So we got 3 years, so 25 times 3, and there's 12 months in a year. So whatever 25 times 3 times 12 is going to be how many rows we expect at most. Okay, we see we have 828 rows. I'll let you do the math on that. So now here is my data that I'm going to be calculating my vendor mix by. And it's going to be a lot more, it's going to be helpful if I actually sort this. If I sort ascending, you'll see I have multiple rows for each vendor. In fact, I have 36 rows for each vendor, and that makes sense because for each vendor I have 3 years of data times 12 months in each year. But it'd be a lot nicer if we, in Excel, if we're going to use Excel to calculate this ratio, the piece of the pie divided by the whole pie. So I'm going to unpivot my vendor name. Actually, I'm going to pivot it. So I'm going to pivot it out so it becomes column headers, and I'm going to put the total cost in underneath each column header. So now for January 2022, I have the total cost going to the right of each vendor. So that's the total cost that I expended with each vendor. Now this is going to make it easy for me to actually do that ratio. So let's bring it back in to Excel. Now notice it's going to add my line item cost by vendor year month. And then we're going to use Excel to do this. Each row represents a year month and then the cost for that vendor in that year month. So I want to calculate the piece of the pie for each vendor. So what I'm going to do first is I don't like Excel table referencing. Doesn't make any sense to me. So I'm going to go convert to range so that I can work with normal Excel ranges in here. So I'm going to zoom in so you can see it a little better. I'm going to put the vendor mixes off to the right. So I'm going to copy all these vendor names and I'm then just going to create a total row or a total column, and then I'm going to paste all my vendor names to the right. And that's just kind of like a placeholder. So now let's go calculate the denominator of vendor mix. It's basically going to be the sum of all the costs across all my vendors for that month and year. So I just, again, take a look at this. I just did the sum of all the vendor costs for that year month. And then I'm going to copy that down so that I get the sum for every year month combination. Now what I'd like to do is I want to calculate what portion of the pie for that month year are artisan focaccia breads represented. And that's basically just, let's go over to the amount we spent with artisan focaccia breads in January 2022. So I'm going to take that divided by my total for the month. Now my total, as I copy it across, I want it coming back to column Z. So I'm going to put a $sign in column Z. And then I'm just going to copy this across. And I'll double check it here. I'm going to zoom out a little just so you can see. If I double click to get into edit mode here, you can see that Wholesome Whole Wheat Works is taking the Wholesome Whole Wheat Works amount for that month divided by the total for that month. So my cell referencing is working. So I'm going to highlight all those and then just double click my little magic handle. And now I've got my vendor mixes for each of my vendors for every month and year. And that's what I'm after. So I'm going to copy those. Then I'm going to bring them back here and paste them in place of the actual total costs. And I'm going to paste it special. So I'm going to Control Alt V. I only want to paste values because I want to get rid of the formulas. You can try it just with the normal paste and see what happens. And now I've got my vendor mixes in there. And I'm going to delete all my temporary columns. That includes my totals and all my temporary calculations to get vendor mixes. And then just to be sure there's no empty columns, I'm going to go all the way to the right. Control minus deletes them. And now I have my vendor mixes. So let's bring that back into Power Query. Now this table as it stands is not in Power Query right now. So I'm going to have to force it to import it. So I'm going to go Data, and on Windows you can do this. On Mac you're going to have to save your data file and import it from the file. But I'm going to do From Table Range and go ahead and import it. And you'll see it calls it Table 7, and currently it's very much formatted like the line item cost, except here in Table 7, these values right here are going to be vendor mixes. And in line item cost by vendor year, these are total costs for that month for each of the vendors. So let's rename this. We're going to call it vendor mix. And it would be nice if we can get our vendor mixes to go column oriented. So I'm going to unpivot these, hold down shift and hit right arrow. I'm just selecting all my vendors, and then I'm going to unpivot, transform on Pivot. This is a vendor name. And this here is I'm going to put vendor mix by month, year, just to help me remember that. So now I have all the parts needed to create that line chart. One thing I want to do is I want to recombine my year and month, and I find that easier to do in Excel. So I'm just going to go ahead and load and close this table in Excel. Wait for it to load in vendor mix. And I'm just going to create a new date column, and I'm going to combine year and month. So I'll zoom in so you can see this. Make this a little bigger. There's a function called date, and the first parameter it wants, first input is year, which is right there. The second one is month, which is right there. Day we don't have, and so we'll just say, just use the first of the month. And then it fills it in here. I'll highlight these, copy, and I'm going to do paste special and paste in the values. And then at this point, I could get rid of these two columns. And then I have my vendor mix here. So now I can I'll use pivot charts to create this line chart. So I'm going to go insert, and I'll use where's my pivot chart? Let it just use that table. Here we go. Let's zoom in a little. Over here, I'm going to take vendor name and drag it to legend. And I'm going to take vendor mix month year and drag it to values. I'm going to take date and drag it to the axis, which is rows. I'm going to drag out the actual specific date and the quarters. And then over here, first of all, I'm going to expand out my years so there's months in them. And you'll see right here that then gives me my months in every year. And I want to change this to a line chart. So I'm going to go to design on PivotTables. I'm going to change chart type. I'm going to change it to line chart. And you can see that's very messy. So I want to actually kind of filter these here. And I'm going to unselect all. Let me go back and look at my instructions. I got to remember these. I want Molten Lava Cake Masters. These are my top 3 vendors in terms of amount we expended with them across all time. Molten Lava, Red Velvet, and Viennese Strudel Cake. So let's remember those. Ready? So let's go pull down here, unselect all. We're going to do Molten Lava, Viennese, and Red Velvet. Was it Red Velvet Royal? Let's go check. Okay. So Red Velvet Royale. Okay. So we got them. And so now this represents the chart that we were after. And we had to go through a whole information modeling to roll things up to a month-year level based on vendors. And then we had to actually calculate our line item costs to get our true cost with each vendor. And then we grouped that by vendor and month and year. And we did some vendor mix calculations using some pivoting to make it easy for us and unpivoting. And then we created our chart using pivot charts. And you could actually then load this data, this vendor mix data, into Power BI and do the same thing, and it would be very similar to pivot charts in Excel. And so one of the takeaways here is sometimes when you can, like on the back of a napkin, sketch out what you want your chart to look like, your graph to look like, and then in Power Query, roll up your data as needed. And when you're all done, you get kind of a data set with only the fields that you need to make the chart that you're interested in. So I hope that helps you kind of practice this, and in the rest of the practice, you're going to have opportunities to roll it up to different levels. So we might do product mix, which is quote unquote sales mix. We might do product mix by year. We might do product mix by quarter. And you're just going to be practicing rolling this stuff up and calculating some sort of mix, some sort of ratio. That way you're engaging in information modeling, you're doing joins, you're doing calculated columns, and those are all the things that you're going to need for the exam.